I was midway through my hospital shift when my phone buzzed with a string of messages from my kids. "Mom, they're moving our stuff out." Just a few words, but they hit me like a punch to the chest. My children had been kicked out of their room to make way for the golden grandchild. The baby treated like royalty. They thought I'd stay quiet, but what they didn't know was that I'd been planning for this day all along. It was one of those endless nights at the hospital, the kind where the fluorescent lights hummed like an overworked engine and the clock seemed stuck in some cruel loop. My scrubs clung to me after hours of rushing from room to room, comforting sick children, answering panicked parents, and keeping my mind tethered to the here and now. I was in the pediatric ward, charting vitals on my last patient before a quick break, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Personal life could wait, but something in my gut told me to check. It was Jack. "Mom, something's wrong." The words were simple, but they sliced through my exhaustion like glass. I felt a tightness in my chest as I swiped open the message thread. Another one followed almost immediately. "Grandpa and Uncle Stephen are moving our stuff." I froze, the hum of the hospital fading into silence in my head. Before I could even type a response, another message popped up from Emma. "Grandma says we have to move to the back room. It's not fair." I glanced around to make sure no one was watching me unravel in the middle of the nurses' station. My pulse started to race. The back room? My mind went instantly to the cluttered storage area off the patio, the one that smelled faintly of mildew, no matter how many times my mother insisted she'd cleaned it. The place we kept old holiday decorations, paint cans and, God help me, the rusted lawnmower that hadn't worked in years. Jack's next text nearly made me drop the phone. "They said we don't deserve the nice rooms upstairs." For a moment, I forgot to breathe. The sting in my eyes was sharp and immediate, but I swallowed it down, reminding myself I was still in the middle of a 12-hour shift. My hands were trembling as I typed back quickly to both of them. "I'm at work. Stay calm. I love you. I'll be home as soon as I can." The professional in me knew I couldn't just abandon my post. Kids here needed me too. But the mother in me was already halfway out the door in my mind, picturing Jack's drawings stacked in boxes, Emma's clarinet shoved aside to make room for Lucas's toys. I slipped into the staff break room and dialed Emma's phone, pressing it tight to my ear. No answer. Jack's line went straight to voicemail. I could almost see them sitting in that musty room, knees pulled up, feeling small in a house that was supposed to protect them. The memory of our morning together flashed across my mind. Jack shyly showing me a sketch of a castle he'd been working on, Emma asking if I'd make spaghetti for dinner when I got home. They'd been happy, secure in the small world we'd carved out together under my parents' roof, even if it was far from perfect. And now, without me there to shield them, the balance had shifted. I went straight to the charge nurse and told her there was a family emergency. She looked at me the way only another working mother can, with that mix of understanding and urgency. "Go," she said, "we'll cover you." It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. My mind was already spiraling, imagining the smug tilt of Melissa's head as she supervised my kids being pushed out of their own rooms, the self-righteous logic in my father's voice about what's best for the family. The bile rose in my throat, but right alongside it was something colder, steadier, resolve. They thought I'd be trapped. They thought I'd swallow my anger the way I always had, for the sake of peace. They thought I had no choice but to play the role they'd written for me, grateful, compliant, dependent. But they didn't know. They didn't know about the lease I'd signed 3 weeks ago, the one folded neatly in my desk drawer at home, next to the keys to a place that was mine alone. They didn't know I'd been planning my exit since the day Melissa first called my kids a handful, with that sugary smile that made my skin crawl. They didn't know the lines they were crossing tonight weren't just hurt feelings. They were lighting the final match. I grabbed my bag and headed for the parking lot, the hospital doors sliding open to the cool night air. My hands tightened around my phone as I glanced again at Jack's last message, the one that burned itself into my mind. We don't deserve the nice rooms upstairs. Oh, I thought, starting the car. They have no idea what's coming next. The day I moved back into my parents' house, the sky was doing that late fall thing where it can't decide between sun and drizzle, and the streets looked like a mirror someone had breathed on. The twins were quiet in the back seat, clutching the last 2 boxes that wouldn't fit in the trunk, and I kept my hands at 10 and 2, breathing like the nurse I am, slow in, steady out, pretending that this was a short detour on a longer road, not a step backward I'd regret. Mom had texted earlier, a neat little bubble of reassurance. Don't worry about dinner, honey. Made your favorite. My favorite was chicken pot pie heavy on thyme. And she knew exactly how to use it like a bandage. When we pulled up, Dad was already in the driveway in that old flannel jacket he refuses to throw away, waving like we were visiting from out of state, not returning with half our lives measured in boxes. There's my girl, he said when I got out. Long drive? He looked past me at the twins like he wasn't sure which smile belonged to which grandchild, but he opened the trunk and started lifting, with the brisk efficiency of a man who solves problems by not naming them. Inside, the house smelled like lemon cleaner and bread. Mom had set the table for 5, napkins folded into little fans, which made something ache in my throat. She hugged me and smoothed my hair the way she did when I was 12, and tried not to cry in front of her. Just until you get your feet under you, she said, and I nodded because that's exactly what I'd told the twins. Just until... It's funny how easy you can make a promise out of air if you say it often enough. They had emptied the old office and put the twins' bed shoulder to shoulder with a skinny strip of carpet between them, like a hotel room designed by a practical aunt. A single bookshelf leaned against the wall. Jack immediately filled its middle shelf with sketch pads and a coffee can full of pencils he'd insisted on bringing himself. Emma set her cleats and clarinet case side by side under her bed, a declaration of the 2 things she wasn't willing to compromise on. I tacked a paper calendar to the door and wrote down school days, my shifts, and 1 bright red dot, 6 months out labeled deposit. It was a ritual, a way to make time behave. So, Dad said after he put the last box down, clapping his hands once like he was closing a meeting, we'll do breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. Trash goes out Monday night. If you need the garage, let me know. Tools are sharp. He said it kindly, a man setting the rules of his ship, and I said sure, of course, because I knew this grace came with the relief of knowing where I'd sleep that night. The first week tasted like relief. Mom knocked softly before coming in to wake the twins, humming as she set out toast. Dad added their lunches to the row he prepared every morning for himself. 2 brown bags marked J and E in his tidy block letters. After school, the twins told me everything in thick, unspooling threads. The new math teacher with the low voice, the kid who traded Emma for the good eraser, the bench Jack liked because it faced the oak tree. In the evenings, I made dinner and Mom cleaned up, the rhythm old and familiar. We were careful with each other, like people who had learned the hard way where the floorboards creak. And yet, under it all, there was the other rhythm too. The way Mom said your father when something was non-negotiable, the way Dad frowned when the twins left a backpack somewhere it didn't belong, the way I swallowed retorts, because swallowing felt cheaper than a fight. One night, maybe 2 weeks in, I woke up to find the house glowing softly like a nightlight, the rain doing a soft percussion on the gutters. I padded down the hall and found Jack in the kitchen, elbows on the table, working a pencil down to a nub. He'd drawn the hallway, the narrowness, the scuffed baseboards, the framed photos of me and Stephen in our school uniforms. But he'd added something too, 2 little figures with backpacks, drawn small and neat and a little too close together, as if making room for something else. Couldn't sleep? I asked. He shrugged without looking up. It smells like Grandpa's soap, he said, which made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. It's nice, just strong. He pressed his pencil darker. Can we put up my drawing of the castle? We can, I said, because why not let paper declare territory where we couldn't? We taped it to the end of the hall, and the next morning, Dad studied it on his way to the coffee maker. Good perspective, he said, surprised at himself for liking it, then cleared his throat and took his mug to the porch like he hadn't said anything at all. The first hairline crack showed up the weekend my schedule flipped, and I had to take an extra overnight. Mom offered to do pickup on Friday, and when I texted to double-check, she sent back a thumbs up and a heart. I got home groggy and soft around the edges, and found that she'd placed a basket of folded laundry on my bed like an olive branch, but on top she'd set Emma's hoodie, the one David had given her, the expensive one with the stitched logo, freshly washed and accidentally shrunk. It's just a sweatshirt, Mom said, hands lifted, but Emma's face folded in on itself, and I felt the old defensiveness rise like heat. She loved it, I said too quickly, and Mom's smile thinned. We can't always keep everything, Amanda. Later, I sat on the edge of the twins' bed and told them we would buy another hoodie when we could, cheaper, but maybe with a cooler color. Jack asked if we could stop by the art store too, just to look, and I said sure, in a voice that sounded braver than I felt. Sundays were family days, whether we were ready for them or not. Dad grilled. Mom made potato salad, the kitchen filled with the symphony of dishes and the low drone of the TV from the other room. Stephen would drop by with Melissa even before the official news we hadn't yet heard, taking up space the way some people do without malice, just certainty. He was a head shorter than Dad, but carried himself like life had saved him a seat in front. How's the hospital? He'd ask, pouring himself a drink from the good bottle. Crazy, I'd say, because that was always true and vague enough to be safe. Melissa would drift through the kitchen, offering to chop something with manicured hands, then glancing at her phone as if the vegetables might bite. The twins used to light up when Stephen came over, because he was funny in a broad way. The uncle, who flipped spatulas and told stories about high school detentions like they were badges of honor. Now they stayed close to me, eyes flicking between faces, as if reading a language they hadn't learned yet. It was not bad, not yet. It was just a house returning to its defaults, and us learning how to float with the current. I tried to do what the therapist had said after the divorce, build rituals that belonged to us. Movie nights with popcorn in the tiny guest room that was mine, our feet tangled under one blanket. Saturday morning pancakes shaped badly like animals. A savings jar on my dresser labeled "Our Place" with a strip of masking tape, where we put 1s and 5s and the occasional 10, counting them out like votes for a future we were determined to see. Sometimes Mom would wander in and sit on the edge of the bed while we watched a cartoon, looking at the three of us with a softness that made me forget the carefulness between us. "You're good with them," she'd say, as if it surprised her. "It's my job," I'd joke, and we'd both pretend that was enough to explain everything. The day David came by to drop off a set of notebooks the twins had left at his place, I felt my stomach do the tightrope act. He was polite like a neighbor, careful like a man walking around an invisible fence. Mom met him at the door and used her formal voice. Emma hugged him, and Jack pretended to be busy until David crouched and asked, "How's the art?" in a voice that said he'd been paying attention once upon a time. They left with a stack of notebooks and the promise of next weekend. After he drove away, Mom wiped the counter twice, as if there were crumbs Faith couldn't see, and said, 12 years is a long time to waste." I turned, surprised by the sharpness, but she looked as startled as I felt. "I meant for him," she added, softening it, but the edge was already there, humming. I tucked it away for later, like a splinter you're not ready to pull out. Money was a math problem I could at least control. I picked up double shifts, traded holiday hours, took the grimy ones that paid more. The hospital's lights became a second sunrise and sunset, and my body learned to drink coffee like it was a food group. At night, I would lie awake listening to the old house breathe, thinking about deposits and credit scores, about the neighborhoods near the twins' school, with playgrounds that weren't too new or too forgotten. I didn't tell anyone about the spreadsheet on my laptop, the one with tabs named Hope and Stretch and Safety Net. Secrets aren't always lies. Sometimes they're scaffolding. In early spring, Mom decided we needed a family photo for the mantle, and she set up her old camera on the tripod like a ceremony. She insisted on coordinating colors, blues and whites. When I wrangled the twins into clean shirts, Emma asked why we all had to look the same. "Because it shows we belong," I said, and as soon as I heard it, I knew how backwards it sounded. Belonging had never been about cloth. It was about room. We lined up on the porch, Dad shoulder to shoulder with Stephen, Mom between us like a bridge. The camera blinked and clicked. Later, when Mom printed the 4 best shots, she framed 3 of them and set them on the shelf. In the one she didn't frame, Jack's eyes were closed and Emma's mouth was caught mid-laugh. I liked that one best, because it looked like us when we weren't trying. I slid it into the corner of the hallway mirror where only we would notice. The trouble didn't crash in, it seeped. Little, just a minutes that stretched into hours when the twins needed help with homework because Mom was on the phone with Stephen. A pan of brownies for the guys at Stephen's work that somehow ate into our lunch boxes. The small gravity that shifted conversations whenever Melissa's name came up, like she had a seat at the table even when she wasn't there. I told myself not to be petty, not to keep a ledger. But I did, under my skin. And every time I told myself to be grateful, the word scratched a little more on the way down. On a weekday that had nothing remarkable about it, a Tuesday, I think, I came home after a late shift to find Mom sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs and a look that tried to be neutral and failed. "You look tired," she said first, and I laughed without humor. "You're not wrong." She pushed a mug toward me. "Tea, your grandmother's blend." The house was quiet. The twins were asleep. Dad's TV was off, which meant he'd gone to bed early or was avoiding something. I took a sip and waited. Mom smoothed the edge of a placemat the way she does when she's organizing her courage. "Your brother called," she said finally. "He and Melissa are thinking of starting a family." The air in my chest thinned. There it was, the sentence that felt like déjà vu and a warning bell at once. I said the right things because I'm a person who knows her lines. "That's great. I'm happy for them, of course I am. There's room in love for more." Mom looked relieved, then guilty, then relieved again. A fast slideshow of feelings. "He's nervous," she added. "He wants to be a good father." I nodded because nerves sounded human, and father sounded like a word I didn't get to choose anymore. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand, and for a second, I was 8 years old and thought grown-ups could fix anything with a hand squeeze. "It will be good for this house," she said, almost to herself. "New life always is." I finished the tea and rinsed the mug and told her I was going to check on the twins, and she watched me go with that familiar, unreadable mix of love and something else I couldn't quite name. I stood in the doorway of the twins' room and listened to their breathing, the way it sinks sometimes like a tide. Jack's sketchbook was open on the nightstand, a half-finished doorway drawn in heavy pencil lines. Emma had fallen asleep with an earbud in, a quiet metronome of music ticking somewhere near her hairline. I thought about what Mom had said, about new life, about this house. I thought about the savings jar, the red dot on the calendar, the way Jack had drawn us small to make room for something he couldn't see yet. I kissed both their foreheads and turned off the lamp and stood there a minute more, as if my watching could hold back time. The next morning, the sun came up clean and ordinary, and the day tried to act like any other. I packed lunches. Dad read the paper. Mom hummed, while she wiped down a counter that didn't need wiping. At school drop-off, Emma squeezed my hand too tight, and then pretended she hadn't. When I got to the hospital, the former charge nurse, Rachel, slid into step beside me on the way to the elevators. "You look like a person who needs a win," she said without preamble. "I can't swear it'll be a win," I said, "but I'll take a tie." She grinned. "There might be a supervisory spot opening next month. Fewer nights, more money." A small, fierce hope lit up behind my ribs. I made myself breathe. "Let me know," I said. "I'm all ears." And I was, because every rung up felt like a step toward a door I was building plank by plank. That evening, when we all converged on the house again like planets finding their orbits, I found a small gift bag on the kitchen island. White tissue paper, gold ribbon, one of Mom's little flourishes. Emma spotted it first and looked up at me with a question I couldn't yet answer. Mom walked in from the laundry room, cheeks pink, hands wiping on a towel she didn't need. "Your brother's stopping by," she said, voice bright and too careful around the edges. "He has news to share." She set the bag upright as if it were a centerpiece and met my eyes for half a second before looking away. And in that small evasive movement, I felt the air shift in the room, the way the sky goes still before a storm breaks. Stephen showed up that night with the same swagger he'd had since high school, the kind that said life had always arranged itself conveniently for him. Melissa trailed behind him, a soft smile plastered on her face, one hand resting on her belly like she was guarding treasure. "Surprise," Stephen announced, voice booming as he dropped his keys onto the counter. "You're going to be an aunt again." The way he said it was less about sharing joy and more about declaring ownership over everyone's attention. Mom clapped her hands together, her eyes shining. "Oh, honey!" She rushed to Melissa's side, cupping her face like she was made of porcelain. "When? How far along?" Dad came in from the porch, drying his hands on a dish towel, and the look on his face when he saw them was pure pride, like he'd just been told his son had won a medal. Emma shifted beside me, her fingers curling into the hem of my shirt. Jack, ever the observer, didn't say anything, just studied the way Grandma's hand stayed on Melissa's arm, how Grandpa's eyes never left her. I forced a smile that felt thin as paper. "Congratulations," I said, and I meant it in the most polite, neutral way I could. But inside, something old and familiar stirred, the knowledge that my brother had always been the son in this family, and the rest of us were expected to orbit around him. Mom ushered everyone to the dining table, moving the gift bag from the island to sit proudly in front of Melissa. "It's just a little something," she said, almost shy. Melissa opened it and pulled out a tiny pair of hand-knit booties, pale yellow with pearl buttons. "I made these the day Stephen called," Mom explained, beaming. The twins looked from the booties to me, and I knew they were reading more than I wanted them to. We'd lived in this house for months now, and Mom hadn't made anything for them beyond the occasional birthday cake. Dinner was less about the food and more about the baby. Melissa described morning sickness in detail. Stephen talked about nursery color schemes, and Mom kept refilling Melissa's glass like she was hosting royalty. Every so often, someone would remember I existed, and I'd get a "how's work?" or "the kid's doing okay," before the conversation swung back to the main event. I noticed Dad smiling in that quiet way he did when Stephen spoke, nodding like everything out of his mouth was wisdom worth storing. Jack kicked my foot under the table and mouthed, "Can we go?" I shook my head slightly, my own chest tightening with the urge to escape. Emma tried to join in the conversation once, telling Melissa about a new girl in her class who'd moved from another state, but before she could finish, Stephen interrupted to talk about how Lucas, yes, they already had a name, would have the best social skills in the family because of good genes. Mom laughed, Melissa laughed, Dad smiled. The twins didn't. After dinner, I helped clear the table, stacking plates and scraping leftovers into the trash. Mom was still buzzing with excitement, her movements quick and light. "Isn't it wonderful?" she said to me, glancing toward the living room where Stephen and Melissa sat on the couch, Stephen's hand resting on Melissa's stomach like he was already claiming the child. Sure, I said, rinsing a plate. She looked at me then, the way she does when she thinks she's reading between my lines. Amanda, you're not jealous, are you? The word landed heavy, a familiar accusation from years past. I swallowed hard. I'm happy for them, I said evenly, and I was. Happy in the way you're happy for someone winning a game you weren't even allowed to play. In the weeks that followed, the house began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. Baby magazines appeared on the coffee table. A corner of the living room was cleared for a playpen for when they visit. Mom started skipping school pickup for the twins if Melissa needed her to run errands. She's tired, Amanda, she'd say. It's hard being pregnant. I'd bite back the reminder that I'd done it without a husband, working part-time with twins. The first time they brought over a sonogram picture, Mom displayed it on the mantel between the family photo and a framed picture of Stephen in his graduation gown. The twins asked if one of their pictures could go there too, maybe the one from the science fair, where Jack had won second place. We don't want to crowd it, Mom said, arranging the sonogram so it sat at the perfect angle. I caught Jack's face as he turned away, expressionless, but his hands jammed deep into his pockets like he was holding something in. Stephen, for his part, seemed to relish the spotlight. He'd drop by with updates on Melissa's cravings, the baby's kicks, the nursery furniture they'd ordered. Each visit came with new stories and new plans, and every plan seemed to involve my parents' help in some way. We'll probably be here a lot, Stephen said one evening as Dad poured him a drink. Gotta keep Mom in the loop. She's gonna be the best grandma ever. I was standing at the stove making dinner for the twins and me, and I couldn't help thinking she already was, the best grandma ever, just not to my kids. Emma asked me one night, "Do you think Grandma will still come to my soccer games?" I hesitated, because the truth was I didn't know. "She'll try," I said finally, hoping I wasn't lying. Jack didn't ask any questions. He just started spending more time drawing in his room, the door half closed, sketching houses with wide-open yards, and no other people inside. The day Melissa had her baby shower, the house was full of pastel decorations and laughter that didn't seem to have room for us. I'd taken the twins out for the day, and when we came back, the living room was still scattered with gifts, tiny clothes, toys, stacks of diapers. Mom stood in the middle, glowing like she'd been the one celebrated. "You just missed them," she said, sounding almost disappointed. "Stephen and Melissa left an hour ago, but they'll be back soon. Lucas should know his family." That night, after the twins were in bed, I sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the mantel. The sonogram had been replaced with a framed photo from the baby shower. Melissa holding up a tiny onesie, Stephen beside her, both grinning wide. I realized, with a hollow sort of clarity, that this wasn't a phase. This was the new center of gravity in our family, and we were already drifting to the edges. I told myself it was fine, that I could keep the kids insulated from the imbalance if I just worked harder at it. But then, one afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Mom and Melissa flipping through a catalogue of baby furniture, discussing which crib to buy for the upstairs guest room. The same guest room where Emma had been storing her sports gear, the one we used when the twins had friends sleep over. My mother's voice was bright and decisive. "Lucas will need the space." And right there, I felt the first crack turn into something deeper, something I knew would split wide open sooner than any of them expected. It started with small things, the kind that wouldn't matter to anyone who didn't live inside them. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find that the bin where we kept the kids' board games had been moved from its spot under the TV to the far corner of the hallway. The spot under the TV now held a cushioned playmat covered in tiny zoo animals, still smelling of plastic and whatever chemical made new things smell new. "Melissa brought it over," Mom said from the kitchen, pouring coffee like nothing had changed. "Lucas will need a soft place to play when they visit." I looked at the playmat, then at the hallway where our games now sat like they'd been exiled. Jack noticed too. He stood there with a Connect 4 box in his hand and didn't say a word, but his shoulders slumped before he carried it upstairs. A week later, I came home from a late shift to find the twins' art supplies boxed up in the garage. They'd been keeping them in a corner of the living room, markers, sketch pads, scissors, and a mug. Nothing messy, nothing dangerous. It was clutter, Dad said when I asked. Lucas could get into it. I almost laughed at the idea of a baby getting into anything when the baby wasn't even crawling yet, but I didn't. I'd learned that pushing back only made my parents dig in deeper, and I needed them. Or at least, I told myself I did. Emma tried to set up her soccer gear in the garage after that, shin guards, ball, cleats, but a few days later, the ball was gone. In storage, Mom explained, as if that was an acceptable place for a child's things in her own home. We don't want Lucas tripping on it. I started to see the pattern. Every adjustment was framed as temporary, but it was always our things that moved, our space that shrank. One night, I walked past the guest room upstairs and saw Melissa and Mom in there, measuring the walls. For the crib, Melissa said, her voice light, as if she were offering me a piece of gum. Lucas will sleep here when he's bigger. He needs quiet. I thought about how Emma had once used that room to build a giant pillow fort for a sleepover, how she and her friends had giggled until midnight while I sat on the floor with them eating popcorn. I thought about how quickly that had been erased. The worst part was watching the twins try to adapt. They were polite about it, too polite. Jack started drawing smaller, as if less space on the page could make up for less space in the house. Emma kept her things in neat piles on her bed, like a traveler in a hotel room who doesn't want to unpack. They never complained directly, but I caught the little looks they gave each other when a new baby item appeared where something of theirs used to be. Dinner became a kind of performance. We'd sit around the table, and the conversation would inevitably bend toward Lucas, what he'd eaten, how many hours he'd slept, how cute he looked in the onesie with the little bear ears. The twins tried to share their own news, Emma's goal in a soccer game, Jack's art project, chosen for the hallway display at school, but those moments were fleeting, quickly overshadowed by another baby update. One night, Emma mentioned she had been picked to start in the next game, and Dad nodded, smiling absently, before turning to Melissa to ask about Lucas's teething. I saw Emma's mouth tighten before she looked down at her plate. I tried to carve out moments for just the three of us. Saturday morning trips to the park, ice cream after school on days I wasn't too exhausted from work, movie nights in my room with the door closed. But the feeling of being slowly crowded out was constant, like a draft you can't find the source of. One afternoon, I came home early to find Melissa rearranging the living room. The couch had been moved to one wall, the coffee table shifted, and in its place was a large, padded playpen. "Just making more room for Lucas to explore," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Don't worry, I kept the corner for your kids' stuff." I looked over and saw the corner she meant, a single basket with a few books and a deck of cards. Everything else of theirs had been taken upstairs. That night, I told the twins we'd spend the weekend at the library. "We'll pack lunch," I said. "Make a day of it." They both lit up at the idea. But later, when I was tucking Jack in, he asked quietly, "Why do we have to leave the house to do stuff now?" I didn't have a good answer, so I just smoothed his hair back and said, "Because sometimes it's nice to have a place that's all ours for a while." The next morning, over coffee, Mom announced that Stephen and Melissa were bringing over a rocking chair for the nursery. She said it casually, but the words made me pause. Nursery. That wasn't a visiting space anymore. That was a permanent claim. "They'll be here this afternoon," she added. "Can you help move the dresser out?" I looked up from my mug, meeting her eyes. "The dresser with the twins' clothes in it?" She blinked, like she'd forgotten it was even theirs. "Oh, we can find somewhere else for their things." I carried my coffee to the sink, staring out the window, while my mind replayed every time I'd told myself this was temporary, that we were just guests in a generous home. I thought about the red dot on my calendar, about how far away it still felt. I thought about the twins learning to make themselves small in a house they'd been told was theirs too. That afternoon, when Stephen arrived carrying the rocking chair, the twins were upstairs in their room. I heard their voices go quiet when he and Dad started carrying the dresser down the hall. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, watching as each drawer, full of their shirts, socks, little pieces of their lives, was carried away. Stephen grinned when he saw me. "Gotta make space for the new arrival," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Emma came down later, her jaw tight, holding a single t-shirt folded in her hands. "This was in the bottom drawer," she said. It was the one she wore on her first day at the new school, the one I'd told her made her look like she belonged anywhere. I took it from her, folded it carefully, and put it in my bag. When the room was empty, Melissa stood in the doorway, hands on her hips, surveying it like a general pleased with her territory. "This is going to be perfect for Lucas," she said. And just like that, the last real piece of space my kids had outside of their bedroom was gone. I didn't say anything then, but in that silence, I knew something had shifted, not just in the house, but in me. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to the muffled hum of conversation downstairs, I realized it was only a matter of time before the walls closed in completely. The rain had been steady all afternoon, the kind that soaked through your clothes before you even made it from the car to the porch. I came in with my shoes squeaking, juggling my bag and the kids' backpacks, and found Dad at the kitchen table with his glasses perched on the end of his nose, flipping through the paper like it was any other day. "Don't forget Sunday dinner at 5, he said without looking up, as if I could have forgotten. Sunday dinners weren't optional in this house, they were tradition. Except lately, tradition didn't feel like it belonged to all of us anymore. The twins knew the drill. They hung their jackets, put their backpacks in the corner of the hall, far from where Lucas's stroller and diaper bag now permanently lived, and went upstairs. I unpacked my work bag on the counter, moving around the high chair that had somehow migrated into the kitchen despite there being no baby in sight. Sunday dinners used to be noisy in the best way, everyone talking over each other, plates passed hand to hand, Mom shooing people away from the stove like a general commanding her troops. Now, they were more like a stage play, where the spotlight stayed firmly on one side of the table. That weekend was no different. Stephen and Melissa arrived early, carrying a casserole dish and a stack of baby photos printed on glossy paper. Mom lit up as soon as she saw them, abandoning her pot roast mid-baste to coo over pictures of Lucas propped up on a blanket, wearing a knitted hat with tiny bear ears. By the time we all sat down, the table was covered in food, but it might as well have been covered in baby talk. Melissa described Lucas's advanced ability to roll over. Stephen talked about how alert he was compared to other babies, and Dad nodded along like they were presenting scientific data. The twins sat on either side of me, passing the bread silently between them. Emma tried to break into the conversation once, telling Stephen she'd scored the winning goal at her last soccer game. "That's great, kiddo," he said without looking at her, already turning back to Melissa to ask about Lucas's sleep schedule. I kept my eyes on my plate, but I could feel Emma's shoulders stiffen next to me. Jack didn't even try to speak. He just cut his meat into perfect tiny squares and ate like it was a chore. I wanted to stand up and slam my hands on the table to say, "Do you hear yourselves? Do you see them sitting here?" But I didn't. Instead, I refilled my water glass and tried to keep my voice steady when I asked Mom to pass the potatoes. After dinner, as everyone moved to the living room for dessert, I noticed that the twins lingered in the kitchen. "Go on," I said softly. "You don't have to stay in here." Jack shook his head. "It's just all baby stuff," he mumbled. Emma pretended to help me load the dishwasher, but I knew she just didn't want to sit on the couch while everyone fussed over Lucas's latest milestone. A few days later, a storm rolled in, thunder shaking the windows, rain hitting the roof like handfuls of gravel. The wind knocked out the power for a couple of hours, and the house felt colder than usual. I found the twins curled up on the couch under a blanket, reading by flashlight. "Why don't you go in the guest room tonight?" I suggested. It was warmer, and I figured the novelty might make the outage feel like an adventure. Dad overheard from the hallway. "That room's for Lucas when he naps here," he said, like it was obvious. "He's not here tonight," I replied, my voice sharper than I intended. "Still," Dad said, "best to keep it set up. He's got a routine." Emma frowned. "What about our routine?" she asked quietly. Dad didn't answer. He just walked back to the living room, the glow from his phone lighting his face. Later that week, the three of us were in the kitchen making grilled cheese when Mom came in, humming, with a bag of groceries. She started unloading jars of baby food onto the counter, lining them up like soldiers. "Lucas will be here tomorrow," she said. "Melissa wants to start him on solids." I glanced at the pantry, where the twin snacks had been moved to the top shelf, out of reach, to make room for neatly stacked formula and bottles. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the calendar on the wall, where the red dot for deposit stared back at me like an accusation. I'd been so sure we could make it work until then. I'd thought that if I kept my head down, saved every dollar, we could survive under this roof without too much damage, but the space wasn't just shrinking physically, it was shrinking around my kids in ways that were harder to measure but impossible to ignore. The final straw for me that month was so small it shouldn't have meant anything. We were all sitting at the table for another Sunday dinner when Mom brought out a tray of cupcakes. They were decorated in pale blue frosting with tiny plastic rattles on top. "For Lucas's 3-month milestone," she said proudly. Emma, trying to join in, reached for one, and Mom stopped her. "Those are for the photos," she said. "You can have one of the plain ones in the kitchen." I saw the way Emma's hand froze midair, the way Jack stared at his plate like he could will himself invisible, and I saw something else too, something in both their faces that I'd been hoping to keep away for as long as possible. It was the moment they realized they weren't just guests here. They were placeholders. I swallowed hard, keeping my expression neutral, because I knew if I let even a crack of anger show, it would come pouring out and I wouldn't be able to stop. But inside, a quiet promise formed. This wasn't going to be their normal. And as I watched Emma push her chair back and walk toward the kitchen without a word, I knew we were closer to the breaking point than anyone in this house could see. Except me. It was a Thursday evening when Mom called me into the kitchen like she had something important to discuss. She was drying a glass with one of her perfectly folded dish towels, the kind she ironed, even though no one but her cared. "Stephen and Melissa will be staying here for a while," she said, as if announcing the weather, "just until their renovations are done." I set my grocery bag down a little too hard. "For how long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She gave a little shrug, eyes flicking away from mine. 6 to 8 weeks, maybe more. You know how construction can be." I didn't need her to say the rest. I could already picture what that meant. Every room in this house, every routine, every unspoken boundary we'd carved out over the last 2 years was about to be redrawn. Not by me. Not with me. Around me. They moved in that Saturday, and the shift was immediate. Stephen arrived first, unloading boxes from the back of a rental truck like he was moving into a vacation home. Melissa followed with Lucas on her hip, calling over her shoulder for someone to grab the nursery stuff. Dad was in the driveway helping them unload, smiling in a way I couldn't remember him ever smiling when I carried my own boxes into this house. By mid-afternoon, the place was chaos. The upstairs hallway was lined with neatly labeled plastic bins, Lucas's clothes, feeding supplies, bath time. Melissa directed people like she was managing a hotel staff. "That goes in the upstairs closet," she told Dad, "and those can go in the linen cabinet. We'll just move some of Amanda's towels to make room." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching the twins try to navigate around all the new arrivals. Jack was carrying a box of Legos from the living room upstairs, and Emma was balancing her soccer ball under one arm and her cleats in the other. They didn't say anything, but their faces said enough. This wasn't their home anymore. It was a stage they'd been pushed to the wings of. By dinner time, Melissa had already claimed the guest room upstairs as Lucas's nursery, and our makeshift play corner in the living room had been replaced with a second crib just in case. The couch, which used to be where the twins and I curled up for movies, was now half covered in nursing pillows and folded baby blankets. Even the kitchen felt different. Melissa had rearranged the cabinets to make bottles easier to reach. My coffee mugs were pushed to the back, behind rows of sterilized baby bottles, lined up like trophies. The first real clash happened 2 days later. I came home from a shift to find Emma sitting on the back steps, hugging her knees. "What's wrong?" I asked, sitting beside her. "Grandma said I couldn't play with my jump rope in the backyard because it's too noisy for Lucas," she muttered. I glanced toward the living room window, where I could see Melissa bouncing Lucas, chatting on her phone. "Was he asleep?" I asked. Emma shook her head. He was watching TV. That night, Jack came in from school, holding a large sheet of paper. It was a drawing of a cityscape he'd been working on for weeks, and his teacher had picked it to be displayed at the district art fair. "Show Grandma," I said, nudging him toward the kitchen where Mom was sitting with Melissa, flipping through a baby furniture catalogue. "Not now, Jack," Mom said without looking up. "I'm helping Melissa pick curtains." I watched his face fall, the pride draining out of him as he quietly set the drawing on the counter. I waited until the twins were in bed to bring it up. "I think the kids are feeling pushed aside," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. Dad frowned, barely looking up from his tablet. "They're being oversensitive. Babies require more attention. It's just how it is." I reminded him that I'd been a single mom to twins for 2 years, working full-time, and I hadn't once asked them to move rooms or give up their space. Mom sighed, shaking her head. "You've always been jealous of Stephen, Amanda. I thought you'd grown out of it." It was like hitting a brick wall. Nothing I said mattered. They'd already written the story in their heads, and I was the bitter supporting character. The next week was worse. Melissa began using the kitchen like it was her own, reorganizing shelves and leaving her laundry in the washer for days. Stephen invited friends over for football games without asking, taking over the living room while my kids retreated upstairs. The upstairs bathroom, once shared by the twins and me, now had a shelf of Lucas's bath toys and Melissa's toiletries, leaving the twins' things crammed into a single drawer. I started spending more time at work, picking up extra shifts, not just for the money but for the escape. But no matter how many hours I stayed away, the house kept changing without me. My kids kept getting smaller in it, not physically, but in how much space they were allowed to take up. The breaking point that week came when Melissa cornered me in the hallway. "Lucas has been having trouble sleeping," she said. "So could you make sure the kids keep it down after school? No soccer in the yard, no music in their room. And maybe cut down on the cartoons in the living room. He needs quiet time." I stared at her for a long second. "They're children too," I said finally. "They need space to play." She smiled in that tight, condescending way that made my skin crawl. "Of course they do, just quieter space." That night, as I lay in bed, the sound of Lucas crying carried down the hall, mixing with the faint murmur of Stephen and Melissa talking in their room. I thought about the twins asleep down the hall, their world getting smaller every day, and about the red circle on my calendar, my deadline to get out. It still felt too far away, but I knew we were closing in on something. And as I drifted into a restless half-sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that the moment was coming when someone, me, them, maybe all of us, was going to push too far. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of grey, forgettable day that you think will slip past without leaving a mark. I'd been at the hospital since before sunrise, running between rooms, my scrubs clinging to me with the smell of antiseptic and coffee I'd barely had time to finish. My phone was in my locker most of the day, so it wasn't until my lunch break, 30 minutes stolen in the quietest corner I could find, that I saw the string of missed texts from the twins. From Jack, "Mom, they're moving our stuff." From Emma, "Grandma says we have to move to the back room. It's not fair." From Jack again, "They said we don't need the upstairs because Lucas does." I read them twice, the words refusing to make sense at first. My chest tightened, the noise of the cafeteria blurring into a dull roar. I called Emma immediately, but it went to voicemail. Jack didn't answer either. The only thing I could do was text, "I'll be home as soon as I can. Stay calm. I love you." Then I went to my supervisor and explained in as few words as possible that I had a family emergency. She didn't ask for details, just nodded and told me to go. The drive home was a blur of wet pavement and the low hum of the heater turned too high. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were stiff on the wheel. I could see through the front window, boxes stacked in the hall, the corner of a soccer net leaning against the wall, Emma's clarinet case lying sideways on the floor, like it had been dropped in a hurry. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and sawdust. Jack and Emma were sitting together on the couch, their faces pale, eyes red. Emma stood as soon as she saw me. "They moved everything," she said, her voice trembling with anger she didn't quite know what to do with. "They put our beds in the back room. They said it's better for everyone." The back room was a generous name for what used to be an unfinished storage space near the yard, with drafty windows and walls that creaked when the wind hit right. We'd kept paint cans and holiday boxes in there when I was a kid. I couldn't imagine my children sleeping there. I found Mom in the kitchen with Melissa, both sipping tea like they were hosting an afternoon social. "Why are my kids' things in the back room?" I asked, my voice too steady for the storm I felt building inside. Melissa answered first, in that careful, overly sweet tone she used when she thought she was being reasonable. "We needed more space upstairs for Lucas. He's getting more active, and it's just better for him to have room to grow. They're older," Mom added, like it was a fact that explained everything. "They can adapt more easily than a baby. Besides, that room is closer to the yard. They'll like it once it's fixed up." "Fixed up?" I repeated, feeling the heat rise in my chest. "It's not insulated, Mom. It's not even meant to be a bedroom. There's one tiny window that barely opens." Dad came in then, holding a screwdriver. "It's fine down there. I put in a space heater and laid some old carpet. They should be grateful they have a place to stay at all." Grateful. That word again, the one they liked to use, like it could erase every slight, every uneven scale. I looked at all of them, Mom, Dad, Stephen, who had appeared in the doorway now, Melissa with her smug half-smile, and I realized they didn't see what they were doing as wrong. They saw it as practical, logical. As if my children's comfort, their dignity, were negotiable items in a family barter. Jack came into the kitchen, holding a plastic tub of his art supplies. "Can I put these in my room?" he asked cautiously, like maybe permission was something he now had to earn. "You can put them in the back room," Dad said without looking at him. That was it. That was the moment I felt something in me snap into place. Not a break, but a kind of cold, solid clarity. I'd been telling myself to wait, to save, to get us out when the timing was right. But the timing wasn't going to get any more right than this. My kids had been told, in the clearest way possible, that they were second class in their own home. And I wasn't going to let them stay where that message would be reinforced every day. I crouched so I was eye level with Jack and Emma. "Go upstairs," I said softly. "Pack your bags, just the things that matter most. We'll come back for the rest later." Emma blinked at me. "We're leaving, like, now?" "Yes," I said. Dad stepped forward, his face tightening. "Amanda, don't be dramatic. No one's asking you to leave." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. You just made it very clear where we stand in this family, and we deserve better. Mom started to say something, but I didn't hear it. The twins were already moving, a quiet urgency in their steps. I could hear the soft thud of drawers opening, the rustle of clothes being folded in a hurry. I didn't care that I hadn't planned the exact logistics. I didn't care that my lease on the new place didn't start for another week. I cared that my children saw me choose them over the comfort of avoiding a scene. When they came back down with their backpacks, Emma was holding her clarinet case tight against her chest. And Jack had his sketchbook under one arm, the stuffed dragon he'd had since he was 3, peeking out from the top of his bag. I took the bags from them and opened the front door. As we stepped out into the cool evening air, Dad's voice followed me. If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms. I turned, my hand still on the doorknob. I stopped expecting that a long time ago. And then I closed the door behind me, not knowing exactly where we'd sleep that night, but certain of one thing. We were never going back to the way things had been. The air outside was sharper than I'd expected, the kind of cold that wakes you all the way up whether you want it to or not. Emma's hand found mine automatically, her clarinet case bumping against her side as we walked down the front steps. Jack was right behind us, his backpack heavy enough to make him lean forward as he moved. We were halfway to the car when I heard the front door swing open again. "Amanda," Mom's voice called, that brittle edge creeping into it. "Stop this nonsense and come back inside. We can talk about it." I turned just enough to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed, Stephen and Melissa crowding behind her like spectators waiting for the next act. Dad lingered further back in the hall, his face unreadable, which somehow made me angrier than if he'd been shouting. "This isn't nonsense," I said, keeping my voice even. "This is me protecting my kids." Melissa tilted her head, that false sweetness curling around her words. "It's just a bedroom arrangement." "You're overreacting." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Would you call it overreacting if someone moved your baby into a drafty back room without asking you?" She didn't answer, just looked away, one hand tightening on Lucas's little foot, where he rested against her hip. Dad finally stepped forward, planting himself in the doorway, like he could block the truth from getting out. "We've given you a roof over your head for almost 2 years, Amanda. How dare you talk about us like we've mistreated you?" I felt Jack shift beside me, and I glanced down at him. His eyes were wide but steady, and I knew he was listening to every word, memorizing it. "Yes, you gave us a roof," I said to Dad, "and I've been grateful. But I've also paid my share of bills, cooked most of the meals, and made sure my children respected this house. And today you crossed a line that no one who claims to love them should ever cross." Stephen stepped forward now, his voice dripping with condescension. "Where are you even going to go? You haven't exactly been raking it in. This isn't a smart move, Amanda." And there it was, the assumption they'd all been making, maybe since the day I moved in, that I was stuck, that I was so dependent on their version of generosity that I'd swallow whatever I had to in order to keep a bed for my kids. I met his smug look with one of my own. "Actually, I signed a lease 3 weeks ago. The house isn't ready until next week, but we'll figure it out until then." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Mom blinked first, her mouth tightening, like she was holding back an accusation. "You were planning to leave without telling us." "I was planning to give you notice," I said, "but your little bedroom arrangement made it clear we couldn't wait." Jack's hand tightened on my coat sleeve, and I squeezed back. I could feel the shift in him. This wasn't just me pulling them out of a bad situation anymore. They knew I'd been planning, preparing, that I'd had a way out all along. It was a piece of hope I hadn't realized they needed until now. Dad's face had gone a shade darker, and his voice dropped into that low register he used when he thought he could intimidate me. "You're making a huge mistake. Pride doesn't put a roof over your head." "No," I said, stepping toward him, "but self-respect does." Melissa tried again, softer this time. Amanda, think about the kids. They need stability. I felt a flare of heat in my chest. Stability isn't about staying in one place, Melissa. It's about knowing you're valued in that place, and my kids are not valued here. Stephen rolled his eyes, muttering something under his breath to her, but I didn't ask what. I didn't need to. Emma shifted her clarinet case higher on her shoulder. "We're ready, Mom," she said quietly, like she didn't want to give anyone in that doorway the satisfaction of hearing her voice crack. I nodded and opened the car door for her. Jack climbed in after her without looking back. I walked around to the driver's side, feeling the weight of their stares on me. Just as I was about to get in, Mom called out again, her voice catching this time. "Where will you go tonight?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Somewhere my children are wanted." Her mouth pressed into a thin line, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the first hint that maybe she was realizing this wasn't a bluff. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, the house shrank until it was just another shadow in the early evening light. Jack leaned forward from the back seat. "Is it true? We have a house waiting for us." "Yes," I said, and for the first time in weeks, my voice felt steady. "It's ours, and no one can take it away from us." Neither of them said anything for a moment. The hum of the road filled the space between us. Then Emma asked, almost in a whisper, "So, we're really not going back?" I glanced at them in the mirror, two pairs of eyes holding on to my answer like it was a lifeline. "No," I said. "We're never going back." And as the streetlights flickered on around us, I knew the hardest part wasn't leaving. It was deciding what I had to do next to make sure we never had to. The rain was steady, cold, and relentless, the kind that seeps into your clothes and makes your bones ache. It had started as a drizzle while we were loading the last of the backpacks into the car, but by the time we were ready to pull away from the curb, the downpour was loud enough to drown out most of the voices coming from the porch. I could still see them, though. Mom, with her arms crossed over her chest, Dad standing rigid beside her, Stephen and Melissa a few steps back with Lucas bundled in a blanket. They looked like they were watching a scene they didn't quite believe was actually happening. Jack was in the back seat, staring out the window at the yard he'd played in since we moved here, his breath fogging up the glass. Emma sat beside him, her clarinet case wedged between her knees, like it was the most valuable thing she owned. The silence in the car was heavy, broken only by the soft thud of rain on the roof and the occasional swish of the wipers. I put the car in gear, and that was when Dad stepped forward, his voice raised just enough to cut through the rain. "Amanda, you don't have to do this. No one's throwing you out." I leaned out the window, water dripping from my hair into my collar. "You might not think you are," I said, "but you've made it impossible for my kids to feel like they belong here. That's the same thing." Mom shook her head, her expression somewhere between disbelief and anger. "After everything we've done for you—" I didn't let her finish. "After everything I've done to try and make this work, you mean?" "I've bent over backwards to keep the peace here, and all you've done is remind my children, over and over, that they come second." She flinched like I'd struck her, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew there wasn't a good way to. Stephen muttered something to Melissa, and I caught just enough to hear overreacting and ungrateful. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I wanted to shout back to unleash every bit of the frustration and resentment I'd been swallowing for years, but I stopped myself. They didn't deserve that energy from me. Not anymore. Instead, I rolled the window back up and eased the car out of the driveway. I didn't look in the rearview mirror until we were halfway down the block. When I finally did, the house was already fading into the curtain of rain, its porch light glowing dim and blurred. We drove without speaking for several minutes. The kids stared out at the streets, their faces lit in brief flashes by the passing streetlights. I thought about turning on the radio to fill the silence, but something told me they needed this, space to process, to sit in the quiet with their thoughts. About 15 minutes into the drive, Emma finally spoke. "Where are we going?" I kept my eyes on the wet road. We're going to stay with a friend for a few days. Someone I trust. Will there be enough room? Jack asked, his voice small. There will be room for us, I said firmly, and that's all that matters right now. The truth was, I hadn't even called Nancy until we were already packing. I'd been holding on to her offer like a secret safety net, afraid that saying it out loud might make it disappear. But when I'd texted her earlier, she'd replied almost immediately, "Of course, come, I'll have the guest room ready." The rain didn't let up the entire drive. By the time we pulled into Nancy's driveway, the windows were fogged, and the headlights caught the glistening sheets of water cascading off the eaves of her small, warm-looking house. The front porch light was on, and there she was, waiting in the doorway with a sweatshirt pulled over her pajamas, a smile that said, "We were safe here." Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and clean laundry. Nancy had set up the guest room with fresh sheets, a folded quilt, and even an air mattress tucked in the corner for the twins. "It's not fancy," she said as she helped us bring in our bags, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." Emma dropped her backpack on the bed and sat down heavily, looking around the small space. Jack lingered by the door, glancing at me, like he wasn't sure if it was okay to relax yet. I set my bag down and hugged them both. "We're okay," I told them. "We're going to be okay." Nancy appeared with 3 mugs of hot chocolate, each topped with a little swirl of whipped cream. "Drink up," she said, "and then you can tell me everything, or nothing. It's your call." The kids both managed small smiles at that, and I knew right then that this was the right choice, even if it was messy, even if I didn't have all the answers yet. Later, after they'd settled in, I sat at the kitchen table with Nancy. The rain pattered against the windows, softer now, and the clock on the wall ticked in the kind of steady rhythm that makes you realize how long you've been holding your breath. "I should have left sooner," I admitted. Nancy shook her head. "You left when you were ready. That's what matters. And you did it before they could do more damage." I stared down into my mug, the cocoa long gone cold. "The lease starts in a week. I just have to keep the kids grounded until then." "You will," she said. "You've been doing the hard part for years. And the rest is just moving boxes." I wanted to believe her. But as I lay in the dark that night, the twins breathing softly in the room beside me, I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving the house was only the first battle, and that the real fight hadn't even started yet. The first morning at Nancy's felt strange in all the ways you don't realize a place can feel strange until you've been holding yourself tense for too long. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something sweet, banana bread cooling on the counter. The twins were still asleep on the pull-out and the air mattress in the guest room, their breathing slow, faces relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in months. It struck me how rarely they'd been able to wake up without bracing for someone's complaints, for some new rule that applied only to them. Here, there was no creak of my father's footsteps in the hall, no Melissa rearranging things to suit herself, no soft, judgmental sighs from my mother when my kids laughed too loud. Nancy was already in the kitchen when I padded in, my hair pulled back in a messy knot. She slid a mug toward me without asking how I take it, because she knew. "I figured you could use the kind that kicks you in the teeth," she said. I smiled for the first time in what felt like days. "You figured right." We sat for a moment, the only sounds, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock. Finally, she broke the quiet. "So, what's the plan?" "I have the keys to the house in 6 days," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug. "Until then, I just need to keep the kids' world steady, get them to school, keep things feeling normal." Nancy gave a short laugh. "Normal is overrated. Safe is better." That word, safe, stuck with me. Safe meant more than just walls and a roof. It meant they could leave their things out without them being moved or boxed away. It meant they could speak without being ignored. It meant they could play music without being told it was too much for someone else. The twins emerged eventually, hair tousled, still in the same sweatshirts they'd worn the night before. Nancy greeted them with plates of banana bread and glasses of milk. "This is good," Jack said cautiously, as if he wasn't sure if it was polite to accept so much kindness. Emma just nodded, chewing like she wanted to make the taste last. We spent the day doing exactly nothing extraordinary. School drop-off, my shift at the hospital, homework at the kitchen table, but it all felt different. I realized it was because every part of it was ours. No one interrupted homework time to insist on quiet for a baby's nap. No one moved their backpacks while they were out of the room. Their voices didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's comfort. That night, after dinner, the three of us sat in the small living room watching an old animated movie on Nancy's TV. Emma leaned against my side. Jack sprawled on the floor with a blanket. It wasn't glamorous or special. It was just easy. And in that ease, I saw how much we'd been missing. But even in that comfort, the worry kept pricking at me. I knew my parents wouldn't let us just vanish from their lives without trying to pull us back, or worse, without trying to make themselves the victims of the story. I'd already ignored a handful of texts from Mom, each one a mix of guilt-tripping and half-hearted offers to talk. I knew it was only a matter of time before they escalated. On the third day, as I was picking up the twins from school, Jack climbed into the back seat with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. "I showed my art project to Mr. Lawson," he said. "He said it's good enough for the district contest." I glanced at him in the mirror, catching the faint spark in his eyes. "That's amazing, buddy. We'll make sure you have everything you need for it." Emma chimed in from the passenger seat. "And my coach says if I keep playing like I did today, I might get to start in the next game." There was pride in her voice, not the hesitant tone she'd started using at my parents' house, like she expected to be ignored. I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, not from stress, but from the rush of knowing we were already better off, just days away from the real new beginning. That night, Nancy and I stayed up after the kids went to bed, sorting through some of the logistics for the move. She offered to help with furniture, even to take a day off work for the big push. "I'm serious, Amanda," she said. "You don't have to do this alone." I hesitated. I was so used to doing it all myself, or at least pretending I could. But looking around her warm kitchen, at the safety she'd given my kids, without a second thought, I realized maybe I didn't have to prove I could carry everything. We were only 4 days away from unlocking that front door, from stepping into a place that was ours in every way. I kept thinking about where we'd put the kids' things, how Jack's drawings could go on the fridge without being replaced, how Emma's cleats could live by the door without anyone complaining. I wanted to let myself live in that hope completely, but I couldn't. Because the truth was, I knew my parents. And I knew that they wouldn't see this move as a clean break. They'd see it as a challenge. And challenges, to them, were things to win. It was just past midnight when my phone lit up on the nightstand. One new message from Mom. "We're coming over tomorrow to talk." I stared at it in the glow of the screen, the comfort of the last few days already feeling more fragile. Tomorrow wasn't going to be quiet. And I had no idea how far they were willing to go. It was 3 weeks after we'd moved into the new place when my phone lit up with Mom's name. For a second, I considered ignoring it, the way I had with so many of her earlier calls, but something in me said to answer. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe just exhaustion from running away in my head every time they appeared. I hit accept. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "Amanda, are you free this weekend? We'd like to come by." I hesitated. My first instinct was to protect the peace we'd built here, the unspoken rule that the door was only open to people who saw my kids as more than accessories in a family photo. But there was something in her tone I hadn't heard before. Not guilt exactly, but a kind of pause, like she'd been thinking about something long enough for it to start chipping away at her certainty. "Okay," I said finally. "Sunday afternoon." "But just you and Dad?" When the day came, The twins were out back, kicking a soccer ball around, the yard still a little patchy from winter. I'd made coffee, because no matter how angry I'd been, the muscle memory of hosting them was still in me. When they arrived, Mom stepped inside first, scanning the space. I could see her eyes land on the framed drawing Jack had done of the house. A little crooked, the lines too straight to be natural but full of color. "This is nice," she said, almost surprised. "It's ours," I replied. Dad sat at the kitchen table without taking off his coat, hands folded like he was bracing himself for a business meeting. "We've been talking," he started, "about things." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Things like how you treated my kids." He winced but didn't look away. "We didn't realize how it looked. We thought we were helping Stephen and Melissa through a hard time." "You were," I said, "at the expense of your other grandkids. And that's what you never seem to understand." Mom took a slow breath, her gaze flicking toward the back window where Emma had just scored on Jack, arms thrown up in triumph. "I see it now," she admitted. "The way we prioritized. I don't like saying it out loud, but we made them feel less." There was a long silence. The only sound was the steady thump of the soccer ball outside and the occasional shout from the twins. Dad cleared his throat. "We'd like to be part of their lives again. On your terms." I studied him for a long moment. "My terms are that they're treated with respect, always, not just when it's convenient, and if you can't do that, then we keep our distance." He nodded slowly. "Understood." For the rest of the visit, we talked about neutral things: the weather, Dad's latest project in the garage, the neighbor's new fence, but there was an unspoken undercurrent, a carefulness I'd never seen in them before. After they left, I found myself on the porch, watching the twins in the fading light. I thought about all the years I'd spent hoping for this kind of acknowledgement, and how different it felt to receive it now. It didn't fix what had happened, but it was a start. And yet, as I stood there, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Stephen. "We should talk. Things aren't going well on our end." I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. Whatever was coming next, I knew it wasn't going to be simple. 6 months after we'd walked out of my parents' house in the rain, I was standing on the porch of my own home, coffee in hand, watching Jack and Emma chase each other across the yard. The grass was greener now, the flower beds we'd planted together in the spring already starting to bloom. The sound of their laughter drifted toward me, easy and unguarded, and I realized it had been months since I'd seen that shadow in their eyes, the one that came from never knowing if they were in the way. The house itself wasn't big or fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen that smelled faintly of fresh paint and the cinnamon candles Emma insisted on lighting every evening. But it was ours. Every inch of it was filled with our things, our messes, our memories in the making. Jack's drawings lined the fridge, Emma's cleats sat by the back door. No one moved them. No one told them they didn't belong. My parents had been true mostly to their word. They visited once a month for dinner, and though there were still awkward moments, old habits dying slow, they were careful with their words. More than once, I'd caught Mom watching the twins with a kind of regret in her eyes, like she was replaying all the moments she'd missed. Dad, in his own gruff way, had started bringing small things for them, an art set for Jack, a new soccer ball for Emma. It wasn't about the gifts. It was about the fact that he was thinking of them at all. Stephen and Melissa had not fared as well. From the little I heard, the renovation dragged on months longer than planned. Their finances took a hit, and the cracks in their marriage widened. Melissa went back to work, and they struggled to juggle schedules without the safety net they'd once taken for granted. Me. I didn't gloat, but I also didn't step back into that role. We were on separate tracks now, and I planned to keep it that way. Life settled into a rhythm I hadn't thought possible a year earlier. I got the promotion I'd been eyeing at the hospital: charge nurse, better pay, steadier hours. The kids thrived. Jack joined an after-school art club and came home covered in charcoal smudges, beaming as he showed me his latest project. Emma made the starting lineup for her soccer team and spent her evenings practicing in the yard until the sun dipped below the fence. One night in late summer, we were all sprawled in the living room, a pizza box open on the coffee table, when Emma turned to me mid-bite. "I like it here," she said simply. "I feel like I can breathe." Her words landed deep, and I had to swallow hard before I could answer. "Me too, sweetheart." Because it was true. The constant bracing for impact, the walking on eggshells, it was gone. In its place was a life we'd built together, one where the air was lighter, the walls warmer, and the love unconditional. We marked the anniversary of our move quietly, a day trip to the lake, a picnic under the shade of an old oak tree. As the kids skipped stones across the water, I thought about that night in the rain, about packing our lives into backpacks and walking away from everything familiar without knowing exactly what came next. It had been the hardest choice I'd ever made, and the best. When we got home, there was an envelope waiting in the mailbox, no return address. Inside was a short note written in my mother's neat looping script. "Amanda, I know I can't undo the past, but I'm proud of you for creating a home where your children are loved the way they should be. Mom." I stood there on the porch, the evening sun spilling across the floorboards, reading it twice before tucking it into my pocket. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't absolution. But it was something I never thought I'd hear from her, and for now, that was enough. Inside, Jack and Emma were arguing over which movie to watch, their voices bouncing off the walls of the house we'd claimed as our own. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat back on the couch, and let their voices wash over me. We'd made it through the storm, and we were still standing, stronger, surer, and together. I thought that might be the end of it, our chapter finally closing on the chaos we'd left behind. But then the phone rang, Stephen's name flashing on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. When I answered, his voice was strained, nothing like the confident tone he'd always carried. "Amanda," he said, "I need your help." And just like that, I knew the story wasn't over. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story hit home for you, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. We've got more real, raw, and unforgettable stories coming your way. And trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.